I am currently sitting in a room with no AC, it's 100 degrees outside, and I just finished watching every trash anime that came out this season. That's how you know it's summer, my dudes, and my lord, I want to die. You should know the drill by now. I sat through the best and the worst this anime season has to offer, and I am doing my due diligence and serving my community service hours by spending all of this time telling you which ones are actually worth watching. All of the shows here will be divided up into 5 different rankings based on how good or bad I thought they were, and just don't expect a lot of sequels here because I'm the kind of weeaboo who still hasn't seen The Devil is a Part-Timer. Now, when as stacked a season as fall 2022 is right around the corner, I mean, look at all these goddamn shows that are coming out next season, seeing all of that can make it easy to look at a season like this and say, wow, there's not really many great shows here. In fact, a lot of this stuff kinda sucks. And to that I say, anyways, summer 2022, let's do this. Call of the Night is the newest anime series that e-boys and e-girls can project themselves onto about this dude who has insomnia, meets a vampire, and vows to make her fall in love with him so that he can turn into one himself. At least the man has his priorities, and all jokes aside, this is one of those series that I probably don't even need to sell you on very hard. It is absolutely drenched in rich visual style and identity, and it really sells you on this concept of the night being this otherworldly, ethereal environment that sucks in the main character, allows him to escape from his dull, ordinary life, and gives him a purpose. And part of the reason it has all of this visual style is because of director Tomoyuki Itamura, a key figure coming from the Monogatari series. What this ultimately means is prepare for a lot of Monogatari quirks, but also just go in expecting immaculate direction, immaculate atmosphere, and immaculate editing that really elevates the hypnotic vibes that this series exudes. Speaking of hypnotic vibes, that glorious bastard Masaaki Yuasa is back at it again with a wildly weird, wacky, and wonderful premise that proves why he's one of the best creators working in the industry today. Is what I would say if he was actually the one working on this season's Yurei Deco, but as it stands, it's just his studio working on it, and I think his absence is why I'm actually not too fond of what they're making here. As expected of Science Saru, you get a bunch of weird, charming, and practically Western qualities to the story, characters, and setting, but at the same time, there's also seemingly no point or goal to anything that's actually happening in this story. In this virtual series that trades love as a commodity and status in this world, you can either be a level 1 crook or a level 100 boss based on how many good things you've done and how many people like you. It's a fun premise for sure, and all of the characters have this childish whimsy and entertaining presence to them, but as it stands, it needs to do a little bit more with that premise if I'm going to recommend it more enthusiastically. One thing I can recommend enthusiastically though is one show that actually makes waiting half the season to make this video actually worth it. Fuuto PI is, from what I understand, essentially a remake or an alternative version or something of a Kamen Rider series, and I think a lot of the people that you see hype this series up may be fans of that original Kamen Rider series, which ironically might turn away somebody who has absolutely no experience with Kamen Rider. So I am here to tell you, as somebody with no goddamn experience with Kamen Rider, I can confidently say that this is one of the best premieres of the summer season, and one of the more interesting detective premieres that I have seen in quite some time. A freelance detective agency is one of those things that I just absolutely adore every time it's done. Link Click, one of my favorite anime series from last year, and Fuuto PI is off to a similarly great start with excellent production values, charismatic characters, and a mystery that unexpectedly starts introducing more than you may initially expect. I am very excited to see the full potential of this series and where it goes, and I can't recommend it strongly enough if you happen to pass it up because of how late it came out. While we're talking about things that came out late then, how about I switch gears to recommending something that isn't even out at all. Gundam The Witch from Mercury is a new series in the long-standing Mobile Suit Gundam franchise and happens to be the first standalone Gundam series released since Iron-Blooded Orphans in 2015. And being the mega fan of Iron-Blooded Orphans that I am also very excited to see a new standalone Gundam series come out that anyone can watch without needing to see a prerequisite of 200 original series episodes. And with this new series coming out, Sunrise have released a prologue that explores the background of the main character, communicates the general tone and vibe that you can expect from the main series, and overall just tells a surprisingly engaging story with strong production values in the span of 24 minutes. Now, the catch here is that it still hasn't been officially released. In fact, what you're probably seeing on screen right now is a very butchered quality version of a stream that they premiered. But whether it's now or later down the line when it inevitably gets an official localization, I strongly recommend it because I guarantee I will be recommending the main series when it comes out next season. It's not all positive when it comes to this season though, and if there's one thing that I absolutely hate, it's taking a series that I like and just making it much, much worse. Prima Doll is a key series with a bunch of makings of things that I do like. It's got an interesting mid-war setting, there's solid setups for characterization and payoffs, the premise revolves around these dolls who are discovering their humanity, it looks nice. There's definitely a lot of things here that could result in a good series, and yet, unfortunately, all of it is in service of the most trite, obnoxious, grating, soulless, pandering melodrama that I have seen in a long time. Every cool idea that this series has feels like it's just pushed to the sideline in order to focus instead on these overly moe characters and incredibly boring, slow, overwrought emotional plot lines that ultimately don't have any kind of heart. Now, I know what I'm saying right now sounds like I'm being overly harsh, but I really wanted to like this series, man, and I had heard comparisons beforehand to a different series that I actually like quite a lot called Sound of the Sky. This series has a lot of the same DNA as Prima Doll, and yet, despite that, it is just so much better in every conceivable way. The characters are actually charming and endearing, the storylines have drama without becoming melodrama, and it knows how to balance the tone in a way that feels so much more natural and organic when you compare it to how manufactured the way that Prima Doll feels. I mean, when you look at Prima Doll, you already know for a fact that every single character in this main cast is going to have this ridiculously tragic and tear-jerking backstory, and even thinking about that just makes me exhausted. However, if you want a series this season that is actually able to take those slow and meandering plot lines and actually make them pretty good, then look no further than Smile of the Arsnotoria. And despite saying that, I imagine this one won't actually be for everyone. In fact, I wouldn't blame somebody for watching this series and still finding it pretty dull and boring, because that's kind of the point. Arsnotoria is about a group of girls within this magic academy in the skies, watching their mundane daily activities and generally just seeing what kind of conversations and discussions they end up having. And when I say conversations and discussions, I mean you will be spending the better part of 5 minutes in this first episode just listening to them talk about whether you should put cream or jam on bread first. Now, I'm probably turning you away from even checking this series out, but I have to promise you that there's actually this immaculate vibe to how this series is written and presented, and how it conveys all of these conversations that they have, all of the things that happen, the way that these girls speak to each other, their cadence and mannerisms. Mostly everything that happens in this series has this wonderful undertone that feels extremely relaxing and genuine. It's almost as if you yourself are actually sitting there in on these conversations. It's just one of those things where if you're looking for a show that you can just sink back into your chair and be relaxed and soothed while watching, I think this may just be the best series this season for that purpose. Now, there are hints of an overarching story that is a lot more serious that could ultimately take away these things that I actually like about this series, but as of right now, I can say I had a good time. What I didn't have a good time with, though, is another Academy-adjacent series from this season, one that frankly doesn't need any kind of introduction at all, RWBY. That's right, we can finally officially say that RWBY is an anime to all of those doubters all of these years. And yet that victory feels pretty hollow when this anime adaptation, alternative universe, reboot, whatever you want to call it, is actually pretty soulless and sloppy. Despite an acclaimed studio like Shaft animating this series, outside of a few action flourishes, it's just really dull and not very interesting to watch, and the way that they've restructured the story honestly feels even more amateur than when Rooster Teeth first started it back in 2013. I guess check it out if you're curious, but honestly I would probably just recommend sticking to the original series. Another series that you should probably stick to the original for is the Tokyo Mew Mew reboot. And that isn't to say that it's bad. It's competent, it has some soul, it has some of that early 2000s charm that it likely gets from the source material, and if you've watched a few of my recent videos, you'll know that I have been diving deeper and deeper into the magical girl genre, and I have been developing a great appreciation for it. But at the same time, there's still this underlying feeling while watching that I would probably be getting a richer and more satisfying experience just by watching the original. Experiencing the source material over its eventual adaptation seems to be a trend here then, because this season we also have Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. And yeah, this is certainly a thing that exists. It probably shouldn't exist, but it's here alright, and I'm finding it more and more ironic how every so often you'll have these just beloved, cherished manga that somehow or another end up in the hands of people who absolutely could not care less about what they are making. And unfortunately with Biscuit Hammer, a manga that I have heard is practically a cult classic, that seems to be the case here as well. Animation, editing, pacing, coloring, voice acting, pretty much every aspect of anime production that you can think of, this series somehow fumbles in one way or another. There are some good moments sprinkled throughout the premiere, but pretty much all of them are due entirely to the source material and not at all because of any kind of effort or competency that came from the anime staff. I'm going to take a wild guess here and say that you would probably enjoy this story much more by reading it in the manga. If there's one thing that I have made explicitly clear on this channel multiple different times in multiple different videos, it's that I adore found family stories, man. It's maybe one of the easiest stories to get right for me personally, just because if you get that character aspect right, if you get that family connection aspect right, I will forgive pretty much any other flaw in your series, because I just like those warm fuzzy feelings, man. I like watching characters developing that bond. And this season's strongest and most adorable example of this is Yakuza's Guide to Babysitting. Now, as soon as you hear that title, I am positive that you have a 99% grasp on what this series actually is. It's got the found family bonding between this Yakuza member and this young girl. It's got the wholesome, adorable, heart-melting camaraderie and chemistry between the two of them. It's got the warm, fuzzy feelings that you will experience practically every single minute watching these two interact. It's essentially everything that you could possibly expect and want from that premise. And yet, if you're somebody that all of that would appeal to, then the fact is that you already know just from me describing it that you will absolutely love it. The one thing that you may not expect, though, is how they execute on that premise itself, because a title like Yakuza's Guide to Babysitting, it's got this kind of comical and ironic sound to it that might make you think that this will all play up that juxtaposition, or even that this may be an outright comedy. And what I liked about this series is that it actually wasn't a comedy. In fact, there's not a lot of comedy in this series in general. It's there for sure, but it's more of just this straight-laced, wholesome slice of life about this Yakuza guy and this girl. And I really appreciated how genuine and serious it took itself, because that ended up making a lot of the emotional scenes and dialogue feel that much more sincere. If you're looking for something wholesome, something excruciatingly adorable, with just the right amount of pandering, I cannot recommend this series strongly enough, because it's one of my favorites of the entire summer anime season. But if you are looking for a series that maybe has a little bit too much pandering in it, then one of the first shows that comes to mind is called Engage Kiss. This may be a prime example of what it means to be so weird, nonsensical, and indulgent that it ends up becoming extremely fun. In this world where demons occasionally attack regular society, there's what appears to be an undercover market where companies and freelance businesses bid their asking price to go in and eliminate the monster. And our story revolves around this broke young man and his naturally hot and extremely powerful demon partner who go in and snipe all of these bids themselves. Now, if the premise didn't give it away already, this is an extremely pandery and self-indulgent series that even halfway through the episode you can tell desperately wants you to self-insert as this poor but charismatic dude who has multiple extremely hot women pining after him as he goes in to be a badass and stop really strong demons. If you are able to look past or even enjoy that eye-rolling aspect about it, then what you have here is actually a pretty interesting and unique core premise with action and spectacle that really ends up becoming a lot of fun. Could it fall apart later on in the series? Absolutely. In fact, I might even put money on that happening, but right now, I think it sets up its ideas and its characters well, where I think it's worth taking a look. Engage Kiss isn't the only series this season about gratifying the main character with a kiss to solve all of your problems, but it is the only good one. The other one is called Bastard, Heavy Metal Dark Fantasy, and yeah, this one really sucks. This was the first anime I happened to watch from this season, and it set a bad tone for the rest of the summer. This is just every wrong thing that you can possibly do with the tone of your series. Now, this is a remake of an old 90s series, and the thing is, you can absolutely feel that in how horribly it balances the grimdark seriousness of its setting and the extremely cringe, goofy 90s anime tropes that come from that era. In concept, that actually sounds like it could potentially be kind of fun with the right style and execution, but in execution, it just ends up horribly awkward and confusing. I mean, there's a point in the first episode where one of the main characters willingly lets many people die just because she's too embarrassed to kiss this kid. Like, come on, man. You are insulting your audience at this point. There is some decent animation and music in here, some good designs and direction, but all of it is in service of this extremely uninteresting and cringe fantasy plot. However, if we're going to talk about uninteresting and cringe fantasy plots, that can only mean one thing. Bad isekai time! My isekai life was your usual isekai shenanigans, which ultimately meant it was dull, forgettable, and extremely trite. But hey, at least it had cute slime, so that made it all okay, obviously. Black Summoner, on the other hand, was also your usual isekai shenanigans, which ultimately meant it was dull, forgettable, and extremely trite. But hey, at least it had cute slime, so that made it all okay, obviously. Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World, though, is another usual isekai shenanigan, dull, trite, forgettable, but at least this one has tits, and the main character is saving up for a slave. That's a thing. Alright, what's next here? Uncle from Another World, okay, usual isekai trash, dull, forgettable, wait a second here. This one's actually really good. The thing with Uncle from Another World is that it's not only doing that rare thing where an isekai is actually, you know, good and unique and interesting and fun to watch, but it's actually subverting the premise in a way that is very compelling. Despite the intentionally misleading name, this is actually about a man who's awaking from a coma in the real world after spending the last 17 years in a fantasy isekai environment. With this premise, you get less of the usual isekai garbage that you're used to seeing, and it's more of this really funny and cynical fish-out-of-water comedy, both in the fantasy world and later in the real world with this man rediscovering modern society. It's very clever, it's got this extremely strong wit and sardonic edge to the dialogue and scenarios they're put in, and I highly recommend it even if you were initially turned off by the fact that it is technically a part of the most oversaturated and trashy genre this medium has to offer. The only other isekai that's left to talk about this season is one that doesn't entirely fall into the dull, forgettable trite camp of all the other trash, but isn't even close to the greatness of Isekai Oji-san. Parallel World Pharmacy is pretty much exactly what you're thinking of when you hear that title, and premise-wise, I actually think there's a lot of potential with an isekai concept surrounding somebody whose main purpose and goal in the story is to heal and treat people medically. Like I talked about in my recent Healer Girl video, the medical industry and that world in general is something that I don't think is explored nearly as often as it could be, and I really like the idea of seeing it pop up more, especially in genres like this. Unfortunately, that's only one side of this series, and you can also tell there is a power fantasy and general trite isekai edge to it as well that will no doubt take up a sizable portion of the story. If they somehow sidestep that aspect completely and focus the story entirely on the pharmacy and medical aspect, I could see this turning out to be a pretty fresh and enjoyable series. Made in Abyss requires no introduction if you're familiar with this channel. The first season is genuinely one of the freshest and most original fantasy premises ever seen in the medium, and the Dawn of the Deep Soul movie ended up being a great and satisfying adaptation of what many consider its best arc. 5 years after that original first season, Season 2 is finally here, and if you've been keeping up with my week-to-week reviews on the second channel, you know that I have been absolutely loving everything about this second season. This may very well be Made in Abyss at its absolute best. The world building, the exploration, and the fantasy is all at its peak. Mysteries that have been teased and built up over the entire series are finally starting to get answers. New and endearing characters are being introduced. The art and production are just as beautiful to behold as ever. Kevin Penkin still delivering some of the most distinct and original music that you can find in the industry. It's just got everything that you could possibly want. So instead of repeating a lot of what I have said in my reviews verbatim, all I will say is that if you are a fan of Made in Abyss, you owe it to yourself to watch this season. And if you haven't seen Made in Abyss, you owe it to yourself to dive in and see why so many people love this series. The only other sequel season that I'm actually able to speak on this season is one that you may or may not expect. No, I did not catch up in time for The Devil is a Part-Timer. No, I did not watch Overlord or Classroom of the Elite. You fans of those series can rest easy because I will not subject you to whatever my terrible opinions on those series may be. No, I have characteristically spent the last month of my life binging and consuming every piece of Love Live media that I possibly can. And now that I am finally up to date, I can watch Love Live Superstar Season 2 with everybody else this season and confidently say, it's pretty good, man. I'm having a good time. I actually have an entire video in the works on my journey through Love Live, so I won't give away too much here, but one thing Superstar has always excelled at to me is this overall cast of characters. This may very well be my overall favorite group from the entire franchise, and the new characters being introduced this season have been just as great and just as enjoyable to watch. However, on the other hand, one thing Superstar has always struggled with is organically moving from plot point to plot point, and unfortunately that still holds true in this season as well. I'm really not a fan of how they're setting up the Love Live competition or the new rival, or how they're transitioning from character arc to character arc. We'll just have to see how all of that pans out, but overall, it's still Superstar, man. It's still fun as hell. It's still got pretty good music, great production values from Sunrise, and if you're an Idol fan or just a fan of cute girls getting up to fun shenanigans, I would definitely still recommend it. It's not just the behemoths like Love Live representing idols this season though, and there's a variety of newcomers to the idol world that range from pretty good to pretty not good. And why don't we start off with the good ones that I think have a decent amount of potential in the long run. Shinepost at its best has dynamics, writing, and comedy that coincidentally remind me a lot of why I enjoyed Love Live Superstar and Love Live Sunshine. It's quick-witted, charming, funny, and entertaining in a way that really took me by surprise, considering you don't usually see this level of care in run-of-the-mill idol series. There's also an interesting supernatural angle to what's going on in the story that makes it a bit more engaging to follow than just traditional idols doing traditional things. Unfortunately, it can't all be that good, and Shinepost does also suffer from the occasional melodrama and screeching the pacing to a halt in order to let you know that you should feel bad for producer because he's let me check my notes here real quick. Oh yeah, he's too good at his job. That's why you should feel bad for him. If they balance the tone a bit better later on, if they can zone in on what's making the girls work and improve on the dramatic aspects in the story, I really do think that this could be one of the more special idol series that's come out in recent times. Another idol series that fared a bit better than I expected going into it was Phantom of the Idol, a series about a dead idol singer who haunts the world and ends up forming a deal with a male idol who absolutely hates his job. They end up forming this pact, and she possesses his body to get a second chance at her idol career in a very bizarre and interesting way. Now, it doesn't quite have the level of wit and entertainment that I would say Shinepost does, plus it's partially about male idols, which means it's instantly not as good, but that still didn't stop it from turning out to be surprisingly heartfelt and fun. You do have to get a little ways into the premiere before you start seeing the appeal of this premise and its characters, but once it starts, there's a great dynamic between these two mains. They have some fun comedy and humorous interaction, hints of setups for payoffs later in the series, and overall, I think that I can already tell there will be tears in the final episode of this show if they pull it all off correctly. However, there's one final idol series to talk about from this season, and unfortunately, not only did I save the worst for last, but in contrast to the last two where I ended up enjoying them despite having no real expectations, this is one where as I watched it, I desperately wanted to love it the further and further I got, but I just couldn't end up doing it, man. Extreme Hearts revolves around a multi-sport tournament of the same name where groups compete in all kinds of superpowered athletic competitions, all for the chance to perform their music for the audience if they end up winning. And this concept, man, this concept and this premise, in theory, is something that I should really goddamn love. It's essentially taking the heart of an idol series and combining it with the heart of a sports shonen. And those two things aren't as incompatible as you might think. They share a lot of the same themes and driving motifs that I really love in storytelling. However, despite that, and despite a premise and a concept that I think is refreshingly unique, especially in the context of this idol series, this show just really sucked, man. I'm sorry. It's just so sloppy and so miscalculated with how it transitions the plot points in the series, how it writes these characters, how it sets up the world. The ending of this first episode is practically an insult and complete nonsense with how it arbitrarily ignores rules for the sake of feel-good moments. I really wanted to like this, guys. I cannot stress this enough. I wanted this to be good so bad. This honestly feels like I was betrayed by a friend watching this series, and the worst part is that I think with more careful and impactful execution, this really could have been something special. While we're in the realm of sports though, if you guys made one thing loud and clear in last season's video, it's that I shamefully forgot to mention Aoashi, dude. Where's Aoashi? It's the best sports series in recent memory. How could you dare forget this soccer series classic? And don't worry guys, I don't plan on making the same mistake again. Shoot Goal to the Future is a new soccer series airing this season, and I genuinely have to say, it sucked, man. It wasn't good. What was good, though, and what does still technically fall into the realm of sports, is a new rom-com brought to us by the author of Takagi-san called When Will Ayumu Make His Move? See what they did there with the title? I thought that was pretty clever. In reality, though, the shogi club and activity that these two characters share seems to be more of a backdrop and catalyst to explore the relationship and dynamic that ends up developing over the course of the series, and it is used to great effect in a way that is both pretty funny and adorable to watch. Now, this being the Takagi-san writer, you would expect another teasing, shenanigan-filled story where this girl just doesn't give this dude a break. He ends up getting a hard time confessing his feelings, and they drag it out over 3 seasons and a movie. But in terms of teasing, what I really liked about this series is that unlike Takagi-san, and even unlike a lot of the other bullying teasing series of this type, it never ends up crossing the line into feeling like it's at the expense of one character or another. All of this is in good fun, and at the end of the day, you can tell that this story is just about 2 dorks who really like each other. Hopefully it's not painfully dragged out longer than it should be. It will. But at the moment, I can definitely recommend this as a fun rom-com outing from the summer season. Another surprisingly fun and enjoyable rom-com to watch this season was a series called My Stepmom's Daughter is My Ex. I know, that name probably doesn't inspire confidence. It actually probably starts giving you domestic girlfriend PTSD, but what I was expecting to be that style of melodrama and nonsense interpersonal relationships actually turned out to be this pretty fun and engaging mind battle series between these 2 exes who are forced to live with each other, hide their secret, while simultaneously not being able to stand one another. It very quite probably will get weirder down the line, but something that I appreciated from the outset was that the focus was more on why they didn't work out together, and using that to kind of psychoanalyze and have introspection on things that they're insecure about. In an ideal world, you could tell a mature story about them figuring these things out, helping each other overcome their insecurities, and moving on their own paths in life. But knowing anime, that will probably not happen. They will probably end up together again by the end. Their parents will separate so it's not weird anymore, and they live happily ever after. I'm gonna keep imagining my dream world though. Moving away from romance but sticking with comedy, one of the more entertaining series you can find right now is called Teppen! And yes, you need to enunciate the 15 exclamation points every time you talk about this series. Teppen is a series that caught my eye before it even came out because of this glorious PV that the creators released for it. I'm sure they just hired some dudes on Fiverr and got them to promote the series, and that already gets a win in my book. So when it eventually came out, I was surprised that this comedy anime series that narratively revolves around comedy trio groups made by people who clearly have a sense of humor wasn't actually that funny. But what's even more surprising is that I actually don't think that that's a huge detriment to the show's quality. While I wasn't laughing out loud every 5 seconds, Teppen still has this great pacing and energy and momentum that keeps it really entertaining to watch this huge cast of eclectic characters. The dialogue, the shenanigans, the scenarios they're put into, it's all a lot of fun in a way where I really don't think that you need to be laughing in order to be having a good time. This same idea applies to another comedy anime this season called Chimimo, something that you may very well have overlooked in the context of this season, but something that I think is actually pretty entertaining and charming and relaxing to watch. This is that perfect kind of series to watch right before going to bed just because of how easily you can get sucked into the vibes of this family and demon all living together. Plus, despite the aesthetic, I really appreciated how this series isn't necessarily targeted at children. There's an entire sequence in this first episode where one of the girls ends up getting drunk and vomiting all over the demon envoy. So yeah, it was a pretty wholesome watch. Now, like always, I have intentionally saved one of my favorites, if not the favorite anime, from the season to talk about at the very end. But unfortunately, there's a handful of mids still left in here, so I guess let's just take care of that now. Bujigire is the kind of premiere that's actually pretty decent, with an almost Akudama Drive set in historic Japan premise, but ultimately I'm pretty sure I will forget this show even exists in the next few weeks. Just like Vermeil in Gold, another Magic School Academy series that I probably could have segued to earlier, but when the most notable thing about your series is that it has a hardcore Shota Onesama pander to it, there's really not much to actually say. However, there's still more to say about it than there is about Musashi Shino, which was 3 minutes long, half of which were spent on silent name card pop-ups, and the other half which was spent on slideshows with characters awkwardly pasted onto real-life backgrounds. I don't know why I watched this. And there was one more. Oh yeah, Hanabi-chan. That existed too. And I only remember that because of their clever marketing scheme of having VTuber-esque lyric videos for the opening and ending. That was a lot of things that I don't care about, but now we can round out this entire video talking about something that I do care about quite a lot. Maybe the shining gem of what is mostly a pretty mediocre season. Lycoris Recoil is the anime that's taken a good part of the community by storm, and for good reason. This is one of those things that I watched and I could instantly tell it would be a crowd pleaser because of its melding of everything that you could possibly want in an action anime series. It's smartly written, it has a great premise and concept, the action and spectacle is beautiful, the characters are immediately likable and have a fun and nuanced dynamic. The direction, the pacing, the wit, this is one of those things in the business that we like to call the complete package. In this almost utopian society of Japan where crime and terrorism is at an all-time low due to an undercover syndicate keeping the peace, there's a wonderful balance of tone combining that very cold and calculated concept of undercover hitmen with a very upbeat and charismatic spy story revolving around this group operating in a cafe. You would think that those two elements might end up clashing with each other, but they actually end up complementing one another to great effect. There's really smart uses of direction and dialogue that reveal the darker sides of the story in a subtle way that almost feels like it's keeping its secret from the audience itself. But even outside of the premise, the dialogue, the characters, the cadence at which the story moves, it's all just so fast-paced and tightly written in a way that feels so intentional and so impactful. There's just tons of little details here, tons of small jokes, witticisms, and understated dialogue that reveals things about the characters in a really natural and organic way. Now, it is very fast-paced in a way that might take some getting used to, but in general there's really nothing for me to complain about with how the characters or the story are written in this series so far. If you're looking for something generally just universally appealing, something that you could recommend even to a normie and they would appreciate the writing and the craft, this is definitely the one to look out for this season, and despite being an original, which would ordinarily raise some red flags for me about how it will eventually turn out, this one is written by the Bento author, and I happen to be a big fan of Bento, so you have my vouch that either the Bento author fell off, or that this will ultimately be a worthwhile and satisfying story. Thank you all for watching. Join the Discord community in the description if you want to hang out and talk about this season's anime. Let me know in the comments what you're enjoying the most from this season. I love you all, and I will see you in the next video.